Welcome to PWS United, a podcast for the Prader-Willi syndrome community, brought to you by PWSA USA. This podcast gives the latest news in research, advocacy, and family support by bringing together staff, volunteers, PWS treatment specialists, biotech and pharmaceutical representatives, caregivers, family members, and individuals with PWS. Our goal is to share education, awareness, and resources with those living with PWS and their supporters. Join us in our mission to enhance the quality of life and empower those affected by Prader-Willi syndrome.
So this edition of PWS United is for our special edition pulse, which came out last Friday. And this is a special edition pulse because we're celebrating 35 years of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I just do need to make this disclaimer because I just noticed it. But if you receive the pulse, it does have the wrong date at the top. That was on me. I apologize. But on July 26th, 2025, the Americans with Disabilities Act was officially 35 years old. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So hi, Carrie.
Hi, Annie. Don't worry about that even a little bit. So many of us looked at this and we all missed it. And Annie was just in the groove of and got into many holes, went down many rabbit holes of the ADA research. So yeah, you were just in the headspace of like, let's get the information together. So don't worry about the date. You're so funny.
All right. Well, some of you do get the special edition pulse and you notice that anyway, just my apologies. But moving on, at the top of the pulse is a photo. And Carrie, when I was doing the research, I came across this photo and it's one of my favorite photos now. And it's from March 1990. And it was a direct action by people in the disability community. And they walked from the White House to the Capitol steps. And when they got to the Capitol steps, about 60 people shed their wheelchairs, their walkers, and they crawled up the Capitol steps. They called it the Capitol Crawl. And it was to draw attention to the fact that our environment, our physical environment, is not easily accessible for people with disabilities.
Right.
So this photo, we can get more into that, but this photo is just a fantastic photo. It's young and old. There's a man with a service dog. There's people in wheelchairs, and they're all, it's like the 90s. It looks like it's from the 70s, honestly, but
it does. The outfits are very they're giving 70s.
They really are. I love it. So it's just a fantastic photo.
And some really powerful signs like, we shall overcome, and access is a civil right. So I agree with you. It really struck me when I saw this photo, and I'm glad we were able to do this and share it with our community. Yeah, what a powerful message it brings. So I'm glad we were able to share that with this important spotlight. Yeah.
To be honest, I've been in the disability community now as a parent anyway for 13 years. And when I saw that it was the 35-year anniversary of ADA, I was like, oh, I don't really know what that is. And diving into it and to the history of it and then the different sections of ADA, it's like, wow, this is critical for our loved ones. Like without this, kind of in the dark ages still. So,
right. And now you're an expert on the subject.
Well,
close, or at least close.
Yeah. Layperson expert, maybe. I don't know. I realize I know more about it now than most of the people around me, but that's not saying much. And I don't mean here at PWSA. I just mean in my general day-to-day life.
Sure.
I did actually I went to an action on Saturday and I got to make a sign that said happy birthday ADA.
Oh,
and
I love that.
I'm going to be there to represent that. It was with a union called SEIU, which I looked it up. It's the Service Employees International Union. And so they have they represent all these different people in different areas of the workforce. So I was there with a bunch of caregivers. My friend works for IHSS, which is In-Home Supportive Services. Anyway, so we were there. There were people that came up from Sacramento and from, so like 5 hours away. And it was really cool to be standing with them now knowing the history of the disability rights movement, the history of how the ADA got signed. And then, standing there with them, like, yes, like Medicaid, we're here
Hmm.
in support of Medicaid and in support of our loved ones and our caregivers. And so it just felt like it was a great way to honor the birthday of the ADA.
Yeah. That will give you so much encouragement, knowing what you know. I can't even imagine how you felt that day doing that, holding that sign. That's really special, Annie. I love it.
Yeah. Well, and that's something that I'm hoping to get across with this or just to inspire. And I think also what Dorothea was really talking about in her conversation, which we'll get to a little later,
Mhm.
the need to be educated and the need to
Yeah,
show up and the need to share your stories and to represent yourself, your loved one, because without that representation, people don't know.
that's why we go to DC as often as we can and why we bring, as many people as possible from the PWS community every other year for our fly-in. It's being there, showing up, lending your voice and your knowledge to change makers like they did 35 years ago for the ADA. So it's important for all of us to keep that momentum going. And I think that we are doing that. We're getting more active in it, if anything. So yeah, it's amazing to see like what happened 35 years ago. Things like that are continuing to happen today. There's still a long ways to go, as we all know. And we will again hear from Dorothea on kind of where we're at with some of those issues and steps. And it's very apparent we have a long ways to go, but we are continuing to chip away with
Mhm.
every trip, every voice. So yeah, just keep it up, everybody. I think that's kind of the takeaway from me reading this and talking to Annie about the ADA. Just keep going. Keep doing it. Keep getting
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah, and I like that idea of chipping away because
Mm,
we're not going to change things overnight. We're not going to
right.
solve it all in one night. So it's important to, yeah, the chipping away. And then, I think it's inspiring to hear what people were doing. The action I went to on Saturday with this union, that union began 102 years ago in
Mhm.
Chicago with, I think, window washers. And then
Mhm.
now it's become this international thing, this international union to support workers. And so it's just cool to see how things build and maybe how things start isn't just where it comes to. So let's back up and let's talk about what is the ADA. The ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it is a law that protects people with disabilities from discrimination. So it ensures that there are equal opportunities for individuals with disabilities in various areas, including employment, public accommodations like schools, transportation, and telecommunications. And the Act is separated into 5 distinguishing sections, each focused on a specific aspect of our society. Okay, so like Title 1 protects against workplace discrimination. And Title 2 mandates accessibility for use of programs or services run by state and local governments. So Title 2 is what we deal with when we are in school. So for parents who have school-age children, Title 2 is important. It's all important.
Mhm.
Title 3 guarantees access to public accommodations like hotels and restaurants. So I believe that's like wheelchair ramps. And that's a two-parter. So that also deals with transportation. So like buses having wheelchair ramps and being able to
Yes.
accommodate. Title 4 guarantees equal access for telecommunication services for those challenged with speech and hearing. So that's providing, like closed captioning, things like that. And
The
then,
dictation, yeah, and
yeah,
email and all of that. Yeah.
yeah, all that stuff. And then Title 5, there's multiple, it's kind of, I feel like Title 5 was kind of like the wrapping it all up, like all the loose ends. But a big part of Title 5 prohibits retaliation against people asking for their
Mm,
ADA rights. And then also part of this is that the government has to provide places with these specific guidelines, something
right.
like that.
So Denise Service, who is a PWSA board member, and she's also a mom to Maya, who's living with PWS, helped us out a little bit with this. And she wrote how this act specifically helped individuals with disabilities in communication. So she learned, and I'm quoting her here, When the Americans with Disabilities Act passed in 1990, it didn't just mandate ramps and parking spaces, it did something just as critical. It made communication access a civil right. Before the ADA, people who couldn't speak clearly or used communication devices were often ignored. Hospitals weren't required to provide interpreters, and schools didn't have to support AAC, and employers could legally turn someone away for using a voice output device. So the ADA changed all of that, thank goodness. It established that communication with individuals with disabilities must be as effective as communication with everyone else. Today, students can use AAC in classrooms, receive therapy in schools and hospitals, and advocate for themselves in ways that were once unimaginable. It is a powerful reminder that communication is connection and everyone deserves access to it. Thank you, Denise, for doing that research for us and for writing that for this because it is such a critical part of that act and for this community. It's something that many of our families experience as their loved ones are growing up. And think of Hunter specifically. He
Mhm.
uses a device, and Dorothea is, our main advocacy person. So I don't know, it just ties in like very well with our mission, our purposes, and our loved ones actually getting the things that they deserve to have that they didn't
Mhm.
at one point, which is just wild to me. But
Yeah.
again, thank goodness the ADA was passed and this is part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I did a episode of Walking with Freya with a man in his early 20s, and he was on the autism spectrum. He was nonverbal, but we did an
Mhm.
interview because he was able to write his responses into a
Mm.
device that then spoke for him.
Yeah,
That was
amazing.
really fascinating. And just,
Yeah.
yeah, I think about just what people did before these options were available. That breaks my heart. But
Mhm. Same.
thankfully, we've had people fighting to get this stuff and also people smart enough to figure it out.
Yes.
To thank the, like developers as well. Thank you.
Mhm.
So we also included a timeline of key moments of the ADA, but this in the pulse it starts in 1973. But if we can, I just want to go back a little bit because
Yeah.
I also wrote a blog. I just was in it, loving
She
it.
was in it, guys.
I was in it. I felt like I was in school again. So I wrote a blog, The Road to the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so I kind of did a little deeper dive into the disability rights movement, which, I was trying to get this in words. I don't know that I quite got it in words, but I just want to acknowledge that while what I was talking about in the blog was just kind of the last 100 years, that humans and humanity and compassion have been around ever since there have been humans. And, people
Mhm.
with disabilities have been around that long as well. So I don't mean to imply that before 100 years ago, there were no activists or anything like
Mhm.
that. I'm
Right.
just talking about like kind of our current history. So it just
Mhm.
feels important to clarify. So in 1935, President Roosevelt published something through the Work Progress Administration. And there was a quote, formal but secret document that labeled disabled people as unemployables. That was kind of the thought at the time. And so there was this group called the League for the Physically Handicapped. And this was, according to this one source, the first direct action disability group in the United States. And so they, of course, took offense and they sent a delegation of 33 men from New York to Washington, D.C. to demand jobs for disabled men. One thing that I noticed as I was reading through these different articles was that there was a kind of a different view of disability, and maybe not a different view, but when they're talking about disability, they're really talking about basically people who were born without a disability who then went to war or
Mhm.
who developed polio and then became disabled from that. So there's this whole talk about rehabilitation and being able to rehabilitate people enough so that they can work. So there's kind of like different schools of thought there, I think, at
Mhm.
the time. So they're really not talking about people with PWS. Even though
Right.
we can like look at this and say like, okay, here's where we start talking about job discrimination and that Title I of the ADA. I don't think they were thinking about people like Freya.
Right.
but but that's okay. You got to
Mhm.
start somewhere, right? And so there was another organization called the American Federation of the Physically Handicapped. And they were also kind of around this time They were founded in 1940, chartered in 1942. Do you know the difference? Okay.
No.
Maybe their like paperwork was done in 1942 as official or whatever. But so they had handicapped and non-handicapped members, and they came out on this job discrimination realm as well. And here's a quote from an article. At the beginning of World War II, the nation was in need of manpower, and America had millions of men and women willing to do their share, even though they could not meet the physical requirements for service in the armed forces. It was then the American Federation of the Physically Handicapped began its crusade to convince the employer that qualified physically handicapped men and women could, through selective placement, do a good job. I feel like that's just kind of another important step on that timeline of job discrimination and just this recognition that everyone needs to have access to resources and the ability to get those resources. And how do we make that happen?
Right.
So then we get the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And this was a really key moment. And this was drafted in 1973, but I don't know that all of it was like maybe it was partially enacted. I don't know too much about that. I mean, I want to learn more, but I only had so much time.
Sure.
But there was a key anti-discrimination element, and that was Section 504. And so that was part of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act, but it was not enacted until we had a lovely woman named Judy Heumann. And she, again, contracted polio as a young girl and she became paralyzed. So she was an activist kind of throughout a big part of her adult life. She actually became to be known as the mother of the disability rights movement, according to one of the articles I read. So she was an organizer, an activist. And in 1977, she was one of the organizers, leaders of a national protest that took place both in San Francisco and in Washington, D.C. So she was in San Francisco, and they launched a protest at a local branch of the Federal Health, Education, and Welfare Office. And after 20 days, I wanted to get more clarification on what that protest looked like, but that's for another day. But after 20 days, the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 was finally enacted. This is a quote from an article from the U.S. National Park Service. And the quote is, "The goal of Section 504 was to prohibit discrimination based on disability and ensure accessibility of public buildings and programs. This would allow disabled people to have access to education and employment that they did not have guaranteed at the time Section 504 had been drafted for some time, but the regulations were not published." So a lot of parents with kids in schools know Section 504. This is another quote from ed.gov. Section 504 requires recipients to provide to students with disabilities appropriate educational services designed to meet the individual needs of such students to the same extent as the needs of students without disabilities are met. Basically telling schools like the amount of effort you put into educating your students without disabilities, you got to do that for your students with disabilities as well. And I'm sure that's where like least restrictive environment and all that stuff comes in, but I'm not even, that's out of my wheelhouse.
For
So
another day again.
yeah. So Section 504, 1977, when it was finally enacted. So now we get to March 12th, 1990. And that is that photo that Carrie and I were talking about with all of the activists in the wheelchairs and their signs. That was from March 12th, 1990. And again, that was 1,000 people, more than 1,000 people marched from the White House to the steps of the Capitol building. And then once there were nearly 60 people who tossed aside their wheelchairs. I don't know if they did it as passionately.
I like to imagine that. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, they just threw him aside and then they crawled up the steps. The youngest person to crawl up the Capitol steps was an 8-year-old.
Wow.
You can look it up. Look up Capitol Crawl. I'll have some links in the show notes. But yeah, so they did that on March 12th. And then finally on July 26, 1990, President George Bush signed the Americans with Disabilities Act. And then we have some stuff in the timeline, which things get kind of reworked or re-signed, or then there was an amendment signed into the law in 2008 and things like that. Yeah, now that I know about it, I realize how important it is to know about and that I should have known about this.
And now you get to educate all of us, which is equally as important.
Well,
'Cause I
I'm
think
picturing I'm sure if we had, like, Stacy or Patrice on here with us, like,
yeah,
I would
they
be so schooled. They would just they would know exactly. They would know all of it. So,
maybe
anyway.
not all of us, me as an example, but probably many others as well, yeah. But Stacey listening to this, she's like, "Yeah, I'm on it."
Yeah.
She knows.
So, potentially, maybe there'll be, like, an amendment to this podcast episode. They might be like, "Annie, you missed some important parts."
Stacey's gonna come on and school you.
Yeah.
She would never. Can't picture that in a million years.
But so that's kind of what I learned about. It was just, again, really inspiring to read through this history, to learn. I mean, to see those pictures. I mean, if anything, Google Capital Crawl and look at those pictures and going through this history, it's just like just being reminded that there are always people showing up and we need people to show up. And maybe in that moment, you don't see the fruit of your action, but there 100 years from now, there may be somebody that's like, wow, did you know in 2025 there was a organization of 150 people that went to Washington D.C. in May, and or no, I guess it would be 2026 is our next DC
Mhm.
plan. But yeah, so I find it really inspiring. Um,
Yes. Same. And having been a part of couple fly-ins now and some other DC events and seeing people come out by the tens, 50s, hundreds in support and to advocate for themselves in so many different ways for the needs again that a lot of people don't know about is so important. And I think that again this just really puts that punctuation, that kind of emphasis on when you do that, things will happen.
yes.
Things can get better, things can change. So I
Yeah.
cannot wait for another fly in and to see all of our loved ones there. And honestly, the Capitol crawl, those pictures and the movement that they did is so special and so important and so, difficult. I can't even imagine at the time. And not necessarily on that scale, but seeing our loved ones walk around the Senate, House buildings, to meeting, and it's so much walking. It's in the heat or the pouring rain. It's we've had all the elements. But seeing our loved ones do that, it kind of reminds me of, that's our way of doing our kind of Capitol Crawl-esque endeavor. So yeah, it really does take me back. And Selena, who was gracious enough to do an amazing video at our last fly-in, and I think we should link that in the show notes too, Annie, so that people can look back on our last Capitol adventure and call to action on many issues. There's videos of people and their loved ones climbing up this giant hill in the rain and hand in hand, and I'm getting emotional thinking about it, but it's
Me too.
it just reminds me that we're doing that today too, as much as we can. So again, not in the same way, but in our own ways.
You got me choked up too.
And all that to say too, if you can get to a fly-in, I highly suggest it because you will feel so motivated and so empowered. And it's just such a special thing to be able to participate in stuff like this, like the ADA and our fly-ins, and everything in between. So I just suggest it if you can get yourself there and haven't before.
Yeah. Well said. Well, so on that note, I think we'll say that there is a whole section in the Pulse on what is Medicaid, how Medicaid works, the federal and state partnerships, mandatory and optional Medicaid benefits, and finding your state's Medicaid information. And then I also included a list of alternative Medicaid names by state, but it's just important to know. I think many people or some people maybe don't realize that they get Medicaid
Mhm.
because it's not called Medicaid in most states. It's called
Right.
something else. So I have a list in there, but we are not going to read through that information. Elaine Toll, our advocacy specialist, graciously put all of that information together. It was amazing that she whipped it up. I think on Monday, I emailed Dorothea and Elaine, and I was like, I'm putting this Pulse episode together. This is what I hope is in it. And then I did the ADA stuff, but Elaine and Dorothea really stepped up with a lot of information. There's so much information in there. But Carrie and I are not going to read through Medicaid because it would be us just reading
For
it.
like 30 minutes, 30 more minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, and not like with nothing other like I don't understand it enough. Anyway,
Mhm.
so just know that we will have a link to a document that has all of this information. And then to talk about HR1, which is the otherwise known as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, Dorothea came on to talk about what that bill looks like in relation to Medicaid. And Dorothea is very knowledgeable on this stuff. And it's mostly her just talking and explaining it to us.
And I think just to give a little overview of why we're talking about these few things is that this is our big advocacy push currently. We're trying to get PWS added to every state's list of developmental disabilities and make sure that our community, our families, our loved ones have access to services. And so this is kind of our today's issues and items that we are pushing the community to get excited about, feel motivated to get involved with to
Hmm.
help make sure that these couple things are available for families and the needs are met. So just to give a little disclaimer as to why we're on these couple subjects and yeah,
Right,
overview of
because
what
it
Dorothea is going to be getting into here.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it seemed like celebrating the ADA seemed like a good,
Mhm.
segue into the advocacy stuff, and yes, like Carrie said, that's where our advocacy is at the moment, and just to reiterate something that Dorothea gets into, that, this bill has been signed.
Mhm.
It is not really something we're dealing with on a federal level anymore. And so back to that list of Medicaid names by state, that's why one of the reasons why it's important to know what Medicaid is called in your state and whether or not you're getting it, because now our advocacy is at a state level. And so now, we got to really know who we're working with, who our representatives are, and make ourselves known to them and all of that stuff. But Dorothea gets into all of that. So Carrie, is there anything else you want to say before we let Dorothea take it away?
I mostly just want to say thank you to you, Annie, for doing all this research and taking, weekend days to just, even though, I'm sure, as you told me, you just kind of lost track of time and went down rabbit holes and it was exciting to learn. But just from a PWSA organization standpoint, like it's your passion and, Dorothea's passion and just our staff with we just really are passionate about every subject that we get our hands on. And I think that you putting all this together and Elaine and Dorothea helping add so much to it is living proof of that. So I just want to make sure that people know that you crushed it.
Oh, thanks. Well, thank you. Yes. And again, yes, thank you so much to Elaine and Dorothea for jumping on this. We're going to give it over to Dorothea and just remember to check the show notes for any of the links that we've talked about. And thank you to them. And thank you, Carrie. We'll see you all next week. Is there anything that you want to say about HR1?
I mean, it's a big bill. Yes, this is a big bill. It's wide ranging, and Medicaid and Medicare are the most complicated issues that I think they're dealing with in DC. It's a federal program, but it's more than that because people know Medicaid through their states typically, but maybe that Medicaid isn't straight Medicaid, which is typically federal. That Medicaid is maybe a Medicaid waiver, which there's different reimbursement rates, different eligibility requirements. So it's really complicated. But I think when we get to like the meat of what's happening here, it's important for people to know, number one, that bill passed. So all of the changes that people were talking about and potential cuts, it's done. The federal government passed it. It was signed into law on July 4th. So what happens now? Well, what happens now is not up to your members of Congress. Okay. What happens now is up to the legislative body in your state. The things that have been legislated in this bill are now going to be phased in throughout a period of years. So we can talk about them in phases. From now through early next year, states are starting to update their policies, right? So they're starting to go through this bill and disseminate what it is that they're going to have to do to now deal with coverage and copays, and There was some information about the bill on home equity and how that might now or not apply to whether or not you're eligible for Medicaid. States are from now through January, February, they're trying to figure out, how does this bill impact my state? What are we going to do in our state to make sure that we are in compliance with this bill? That's immediate. And then there's the phase one. So there's the rollout of work mandates, which starts at some point in 2026. I think it's October-ish. 2026. So there's the rollout of the mandates and the eligibility redeterminations, and then the funding of the rural hospitals begins. And that's 2 years. That's 2026 to 2028. Phase two, 2028 to 2031. These are provider tax caps, state-directed payment limits. How does that affect people who are receiving Medicaid and Medicaid waiver benefits? If a provider decides that they're no longer making enough money taking Medicaid patients and they stop taking Medicaid patients, that's how it affects the Medicaid population, because you're looking for a provider, right? You're looking for a doctor who's going to see your kid, and they've all decided that they're not making enough money taking Medicaid population, so they're out. They're going to take private insurance. That's how those cuts could affect you. But again, those payment limits and state-directed payment limits, those tax caps, that's state by state. And then phase three, which doesn't even start until 5 years from now, 2030, and rolls 2030 to 2034, that starts the Medicaid spending reduction hits. Okay, so what does all of this mean, right? What do we do with all this? Oh my gosh, this is so much information. This is not even like the tip of the iceberg. I'm just trying to disseminate what the bulk of this looks like. What does this look like? Guys, it passed Congress. It was signed into law by the president. It's no longer in the hands of Congress. They have shifted responsibility to the states. And so if you have complaints, concerns, or questions, you need to understand your state profile. You need to understand, first and foremost, did your state expand Medicaid? Do you have provider taxes? Do you have supplemental payment programs? You need to prepare for eligibility issues. So get ready. If you are receiving any kind of Medicaid or Medicaid waiver benefits, get ready to have to do that more times during the year. So if you're used to it's July, right? If you're used to every July, I have to do a redetermination of my benefits, be prepared to have to do that in July and to have to do that in January or December, however the state. Be prepared to maybe have to do it every 4 months, depending on how your state's doing. So you have to be paying attention to your emails. You have to be paying attention to the notices that are going to be coming in your mail, because they're going to put you on alert. Hey, instead of doing your redetermination every year at this time, we are now requiring you to do it every X months. Your redetermination is due within 30 days. Those are the kind of notices that people are going to be receiving. They're going to be shocked. They're not going to understand. And that's how people will lose coverage. You need to start paying attention to those eligibility letters and those redetermination emails and letters that are going to be coming to you. So then what do we do, right? If it's up to the states, what do we do? We're paying attention. We're watching our mail. We're reading our email. Okay, what can you do? Just as you've created a relationship with your member of Congress, your U.S. House of Representative member or your U.S. Senator, you're now going to have to do that in your state legislatures and your general assemblies. So your state House members and your state senators. And I realize that sometimes people don't know the difference. On our website, on our advocacy page, there's a place where you can go in and you can put your information. It says, find my elected official. You can type in your information and it's going to break it down and it's going to show you your president. It's going to show you all your federally elected officials. And then it's going to go into your state elected officials. And then it's going to go into your local elected officials. You don't have to worry about your local elected officials, although all politics is local. Your state elected officials are the ones that are making the rules right now. So what do you want to do? You want to create a relationship with your state House member and your state senator. Well, how do you do that? We're putting a tip sheet on our advocacy page, but in order to build a relationship with your state legislator, it's the same way you do it with your member of Congress. You can start with a phone call or an email. What's great about your state legislators is that they all have district offices in your neighborhood. These are your state elected officials. Their district office is probably 20 minutes from your house. You can send them an email or pick up the phone and call their district office. And if you do what I said and you put your information and you look up your elected officials, you'll be able to get their contact information when you do that. So you'll have an email and a phone number. Pick up the phone, call their office, say, hey, listen, I'm a constituent. I'd love to come to the office. I have a kid that's living with a rare disease. I'm really concerned with the potential cuts to Medicaid. My kid is receiving Medicaid waiver benefits or XYZ benefits. I'd love to come in, introduce you to my loved one living with Prader-Willi syndrome, and talk to you a little bit about the services that we receive, why they're necessary, and I'd love to find a way to be able to help. So this is how you are able to share your story in person with your elected officials. And I know that we already have advocates that are doing that. I know that some of our ambassadors are already doing that. And that's how you're going to make a difference. You're going to create a relationship with the people in your district, your state elected officials. And then they're going to say, hey, my constituent, Dorothea, brought her son Hunter to see me. And let me tell you why they need to be able to maintain Medicaid benefits. And then go back to the actual language of the federal bill that was passed, which stipulated in black and white that these cuts should not affect the disability population. So if a state is not paying attention to the black and white print that the disability community is exempt from work requirements and some of these harsh requirements, then there is a problem. While you're creating this relationship, members are going to look to you for stories. They're going to look to you to engage with. They're going to look to you if there's an opportunity to provide testimony at a committee. They're going to look to you for that. Also, as we're rolling out through this phased process, we're getting ready. You'll probably start seeing the commercials in January, depending on where you live, but we're getting ready to go into the midterm election cycle. So you might start seeing things in December, depending on where you live. Legislatures are about to shift. Congress always shifts, so changes are going to happen. You make yourself relevant. You go, if there is a town hall meeting, you go to the town hall meeting. They're in your district. They're always in your district. If you have somebody that you've created a relationship with and they're holding some activities, maybe something in a park, maybe it's a campaign activity, you have the ability to go to that and bring your loved one living with PWS, okay, with you. Engage on their social media channels, which don't look to me for that because social media just drives me crazy, but it's really effective and they pay attention. If you're doing something and you're advocating and you're starting to tag them in something. Hey, I met with so-and-so today. Tag them in your posts. They love that. And then they know that you're engaged and they're going to keep leaning on you. You can write an op-ed. If you don't know how to do that, I believe we have a guide on our website. You can always, and if you're not comfortable just going by a guide, reach out to us. You can reach out to advocacy at pwsausa.org, which that email comes to myself and to Elaine, and we can help you write an op-ed. It's so much easier than you think. Anytime you can get an in-person meeting and with your state legislators, it's so easy.
I'm forming a relationship with our assembly member on a different issue, but he would be a valuable person as well, right?
I don't know what your different issue is, but this needs to be your issue. Yes. Yes, absolutely. The answer is if you have a relationship or you're working with them on anything else, any opportunity you get to be like, hey, listen, what do you think the state's going to do about the Medicaid cuts? What are you guys looking at? How can I help? Here's my story. And you can talk about, like for you, Annie, talk about when Freya was starting school, talk about how everything was fine until all of a sudden it wasn't. And you realized I need services, I need help, I need IEPs, I need this, I need that. And so there's so many families out there who don't know that they need until they already need. And sometimes at that point it's too late and you're stuck in this 2-year cycle just trying to get things. So let your member who you've created this relationship with know that you are a resource that they can rely on as they're going through this process to implement what they need to implement for the state of California. It sounds complicated, guys, but it's so much easier than that. At the end of the day, these relationships are what make and break everything that goes on in public policy. Nobody wants to cut. Nobody wants to make cuts, especially to the most vulnerable population. So the more active that you can be, the more engaged that you can be, the more that you can put a face on what it would mean to communities like ours, the better it is. And I say this jokingly because I'm trying not to look at Annie's face as we're recording this podcast. You don't want to go in with a pitchfork. I know a lot of people want to go in with pitchforks, and I guess there's times where that can be effective, right? But what we want to do as a community is come together and say, listen, we know that you guys have to do stuff. We know that the federal government has now said, hey, states, it's in your hands. You got to get this done. We don't care how. This is just what you got to end up doing. So we want to be the community that says, okay, we get it. You got to do stuff. Let us be a part of the process. Make us a part of the process. We represent one of the most vulnerable populations who are going to suffer the most from some of these cuts. Let us be a part of the solution and let us help you think outside of the box so that these cuts don't devastate the most vulnerable populations, like my family. And when we've done that at any level, we find that it's reciprocated. We find that people call on us more, that people are asking us to share more, that when conversations about potential cuts or looming cuts are happening, that we're given a seat at the table to really put a face and explain. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't, but most of the times it's helpful. And if you've done all of that and you have been a part of the process and you have made the contacts and the state still puts you and your family in a position where you're losing services, I mean, then maybe we get some pitchforks.
I was hoping that's what you were going to say.
I mean, there's a time, but we can't get a pitchfork until we've done everything that we can. And you have to educate yourself. You have to educate your members. They don't know. Does anybody understand what this life is really like? How many IEP meetings do you have to go to understand that the people around you, even the ones working in our space, don't understand what this life is like? We cannot expect and assume that people understand the hardships that we face on a daily basis. We have to keep it in their face constantly, all the time, in a very nice way. When I worked in the Florida legislature a million years ago, I had people who came in with pitchforks. Those people didn't get meetings.
Mm.
And they didn't get meetings because I worked for somebody she could pitch a pitchfork as well as the next person, right? But I was never going to put her in a compromising position where there are people who are unwilling to be a part of the process and help us figure it out. These elected officials, especially on the state level, I mean, many states have term limits. You know, it takes years to really even start to begin to understand the process. You have to depend on your constituents to help educate you. Medicaid? I don't want to generalize with the percentage of elected officials in Congress who don't understand Medicaid, but it's a lot of them. It's so complicated and it changes all the time. And it's the largest portion of our federal budget. It's
Wow.
a tremendous amount of money. So if these folks who have been elected officials for so long, most on the state level first and then on the federal level, for us on the state level, when we're working state level, it's about educating, and staying engaged. And we know it's hard because this process wears on you. And constantly being engaged wears you down. But there's no other way that we're going to be able to get a handle on what states are going to do as they start to implement these rules that the federal government has required they put into place. It's now in the hands of the state.
I love interviewing you, Dorothea, because you ask yourself the questions. You touched on all the points I would ask about. I think just as one final thought here, as Dorothea mentioned, we're working on, some great tools, a great toolkit for all things advocacy and tackling today's issues and needs. And we'll have that available soon. But we do have a one-pager on what is Prader-Willi syndrome that's kind of more advocacy branded. And we will have a link for that in the show notes for anyone who wants to take, that first step and set up a meeting. That's a great document to bring along and leave behind. So we are in the process of a call to action around submitting Medicaid stories. Can you tell us a little bit about the importance of that, Dorothea? And
Right.
we'll for sure have a link in the show notes as well.
So there's so much that's important about what we're doing for this call to action right now. So there's two reasons. Number one, we actually started doing this a few months ago, but we ask you guys for so much that we're not surprised when we put a call for action out and it doesn't always go through right away. So that's a sideways jab to say we need more stories. So we started asking for Medicaid stories when Congress was still working on HR 1, but it is translated because we need Medicaid stories for more than one purpose now. Purpose one is now as states have to implement the changes. that have been mandated by the federal government due to HR1. We need to be able to share some at a moment's notice. So if we get a call from any state, hey, listen, there's going to be a hearing, there's going to be an opportunity to submit written testimony at XYZ committee meeting. We now, as an organization, have stories that we can share. So we don't have to say, I mean, we'll still put out a call to action and say, oh my gosh, if you live in the state, blah, 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 send, send, send. But now we are starting to create a database of stories that we can say, okay, good. We've got 5 stories in the state of Texas that we can go ahead and we could submit those stories to this committee as part of public testimony so we can get them on the record. So these stories now have an opportunity to become part of public record. The second reason is, guys, we just had the first drug approved to treat hyperphagia in PWS. And it's interesting because I had a conversation earlier today where we were talking about why is it important to share stories? There are meetings that are happening all over the country now. One already happened, our first virtual meeting with an opportunity to provide written testimony and oral testimony is coming up in a couple of weeks. And these are P&T committees, which are pharmacy and therapeutics, and DUR boards, drug utilization boards, and these happen throughout the country. In some states, approval for a drug that's been approved by FDA can automatically get approved for payment in that state's Medicaid system, right? In many states, you have to go through a P&T or DUR board, and they have to review it. Let's talk about this really quick. And I don't do anything really quickly. So there's that. We know that there are a lot of individuals in our community who've already had access and they're taking VYKAT XR, the first approved treatment for hyperphagia and PWS. Soleno has been amazing and been able to help provide access for families. And they have been working with, they have set up a program and they have been working to make sure that coverage is provided for people, regardless of whether or not they have private insurance or public insurance, which would be Medicaid or Medicare. But now there's the process that's starting to happen where these P&T committees and DUR boards are reviewing the drug to decide whether they're going to pay for that drug. So why is it important that we have Medicaid stories? Because we need to be able to explain to these committees why it's important to include coverage for a drug that treats hyperphagia in PWS. And one of the things that we're starting to see, right? And we anticipated that this might be an issue, right? Because everybody knows what a GLP-1 is, right? What GLP-1 medication. And what we are now seeing is that we have to educate these committees and these board members as to the difference between what obesity is versus what hyperphagia is. Why do we need a drug to treat hyperphagia? Why can't our community members just take a GLP-1? And so that's what we're starting to see. And these Medicaid stories that we're asking you all to send us are a part of what we're able to do to educate these members. Because let's say you live in a state and your kid is on VYKAT and you've been getting it. And then that state has a meeting, a P&T meeting, DUR board, and they decide, you know what? We've decided that we're not going to cover this drug in our state. What happens to you and all the other families that are living in that state that are already on that drug? And now Medicaid's not going to cover it in your state. Now what do we do? Now we have a problem, right? So that is another reason why we're asking Medicaid stories. And your stories don't have to be bad. They can be great. They can be, I live in XYZ state, and as a result, my kid has had all these services, and they have been able to be successful, and they have been able to live their best quality of life. And it can be that to show why their Medicaid system is so great. It can be, I've never been able to get anything. My child is suffering. They won't provide me services. It can be the horrible story. It can be I used to live in this state and now I live in this state and it was great here and it's horrible here, or vice versa. It can be anything. Good, bad, great, ugly. We need all of them because we need to be able to show even the bad states, hey, this state is doing it right. Or hey, this state is doing it wrong, but then they changed something and now they're doing it right. So we need all the stories. We need them to help as states start to implement these potential cuts through phases. We need them as VYKAT is going through the process of being approved for the drug formulary. And VYKAT is the first of many, right? So it's important that we start making the distinction state by state. What is hyperphagia? Hyperphagia does not always equal obesity. Plenty of us have kids with PWS who are lean, and we work really, really, really hard to try to ensure that they stay that way. It is not easy.
Well, just to clarify, because I was talking with Elaine about this, and I mean, this is for me personally, but I think it could help people because I hadn't submitted a story yet. Freya gets Medi-Cal, which is what Medicaid is called in the state of California.
That's a waiver
And
program, though, no?
I didn't know.
It's okay. I'm pretty sure it is, but go ahead.
So I would say, like, medically, it's not an issue. Like, her doctor's appointments are always paid for. She gets her growth hormone on time. Like, that's not a problem. It was in the beginning. It's not anymore. But getting her into the regional center is an issue, and I didn't think that was Medicaid related. So I was asking Elaine about it. But like, Medicaid would pay for those services, but I can't even get her in the door.
Is that
So
because you don't have? I think we talked about that a little bit. Is that because you don't have a regional center?
no, we have a regional center. They don't believe that she is developmentally delayed and
Oh,
not for their services.
okay. Oh, Annie, and you
So
have
is
a
that like, would that be a story or no?
yes, that's a story. And guess who that's a story for in addition to one of our stories? That's a story for your state elected official and say, listen, clearly this is my daughter's diagnosis, which is a related issue according to Medicaid in the state of California. PWS is a related issue. Um, why they're saying that she is not qualified for services. That is where your relationship with your elected official makes the difference in the world because they can pick up the phone or their aide can pick up the phone and say, what are you guys doing? You're violating state statute. That's where the relationship becomes key. People don't necessarily realize that about their state elected officials. Their jobs as state elected officials are to ensure that these government agencies ruled by the state are working the way that they were meant to work. Okay. And if your daughter should be receiving services, which clearly she has PWS, she should automatically
Right,
be
right.
eligible. Okay. And they are saying no, that is your phone call or your meeting with your state house member or your state senator and say, how can they be saying this to me when PWS is listed? Like,
But well,
how?
it's not.
No, but it is a related condition. It's listed as a related condition, and they're not reading behind the original statute. It is in the state of California, it's not listed explicitly, but it is a related condition. And they should at least have her brought in for an evaluation and give you an opportunity to have her evaluated and provide whatever supplemental information you need to. But that is where your relationships with your state elected officials can come into play. And I know because people used to call our office, and that was the best part of my day. A constituent would call our office, and I'd be like, "Oh, the state agency isn't helping you. Okay, let me make sure all your documents are in a row. Yep, 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 yep. Oh, absolutely." And I'd get there and I'd pick up the phone and I'd call the governmental liaison on the other end of the department and say, "What are you guys doing? This is my member's constituent. They clearly should be receiving all of these services. Why aren't you even evaluating them? Why aren't you doing?" And sure enough, they get in the door. I mean, that is the job. That is why another reason why these relationships are so important. So do it, Annie.
Yeah,
And
great
then
example.
and write about it. Do it and write about it because that's why you create the relationships.
So I think just to end here and tie us up in a little bow, there is a very exciting event coming up in 2026 that we have dates for. And
Yes.
it's our third DC fly-in, which is wild.
Crazy.
It's amazing, Dorothea, that we're
It's so
the
wild.
third time that we're going to be able to do this. I'm so happy that it's continued to grow and we're able to put it on every other year. Just to throw those dates out so people can already mark them in their calendar, it is going to be May 4th through 6th, 2026. And that is in Washington, D.C. And we're going to have more information. We'll have an application coming out in the near-ish future. Yeah.
It will be in the near-ish future. Individuals who are a member of our advocacy committee will get first dibs on those applications. We will have to cap attendance at 150 people. Guys, we just can't have it turn into another conference. We'd love to have the entire community there, but no can do. Committee members will get first dibs. And then we'll open it up to the public. It gets really competitive. We had to close down applications after 2.5 days the last time we did
That's
it.
right.
So when we start to make those announcements, pay attention because we can't help you if you don't.
Well, thanks, Dorothea, for giving us all your wisdom and insight into this topic, because Annie and I, we can go down rabbit holes all day, but we're also like, what? So you answered that question and
Well,
many
Annie,
others.
I want to hear what happens when you contact your member and say, I'm trying to get into the center and they're saying she's not qualified and she clearly is and I need your help. I want to hear that story.
Thank you for listening to this episode of PWS United. If you want to learn more about Prader-Willi syndrome and how PWSA USA is making strides in advocacy, family support, and research, visit www.pwsausa.org. And while you're there, we encourage you to sign up for our Pulse email newsletter to stay informed about the latest news, resources, and events. Don't forget to subscribe to the PWS United podcast so you never miss an episode. Our team is always available to support families and their loved ones living with PWS 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. You can call us at 941-312-0400 or email info@pwsausa.org. Catch a new episode next Tuesday, and until then, have a great week.